Good evening, everybody. We are now going to get started with the June 20th meeting of the Police Board. My name is Kyle Cooper, and I'm the president of the Police Board. I am now calling the board's June 20th public meeting to order. We thank KNTV for covering this meeting. It is being broadcast on Channel 27 and live streamed at kntv.org and on the KNTV app. Along with myself, we have the following board members attending in person this evening. Vice President, Ms. Paula Wolf. New member, Ms. Claudia Badillo, Ms. Mariley Cusack, Ms. Nanette Dorley, new member, Mr. Justin Terry, and Andrea Safakis. In addition to the police board members, we also have the following city officials here with us tonight. Superintendent of Police, Mr. Larry Snelling, the Chief Administrator of the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, Ms. Andrea Kirsten, the Inspector General, Deborah Wurzburg, who is here in place of Deputy Inspector General for Public Safety, Tabara Richardson, the Deputy Chief of the Chicago Police Department's Bureau of Internal Affairs, Ms. Tracy Walker, who is representing Chief Yolanda Talley, the General Counsel to the Superintendent, Mr. Scott Spears, and the Police Board's Executive President, Mr. Max Caproni. Before we proceed to the items on the meeting agenda, I want to welcome two new Police Board members to their first public meeting. On June 12th, the City Council approved the appointments of Ms. Claudia Badillo and Justin Terry to the board. I now, at this time, would ask Ms. Badillo to introduce herself and make any comments that she might wish to make.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Claudia Badillo. Thank you for the introduction. I am new to the board. This is my first board meeting. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy that I was selected. I think this is a really important job. If you want to know a little bit about me, I grew up in Chicago, born and raised here. I live all the way up in the 41st Ward, and I grew up in the 45th Ward. Obviously, I'm an attorney. I practice consumer bankruptcy in my normal life, so I help people who have, issues with financial distress, and I really enjoy helping people. But like I said, I'm born and raised in Chicago, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Badillo. Mr. Terry?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Justin Terry, new to the police board, as you just heard. Long time near South Side resident, resident of the 3rd Ward currently. Happy to be here. I am a practicing attorney and real estate guy, and my goal in being here is to, help bridge that gap between the community and the police, and just humbled to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Terry. We will now proceed to the items on the meeting agenda. We are pleased to have with us this evening Jans Ludwig, the Edwin A. and B.D. L. Bergman Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago and Pritzker Director of the University of Chicago's Crime Lab. Professor Ludwig will be giving a presentation on predicting police misconduct.
I'm going to talk about some, I'm going to talk about some work that I've been doing with my colleagues Greg Stoddard and Dylan Fitzpatrick at the University of Chicago as part of the consent decree between the Chicago Police Department and the Illinois Attorney General's office that we hope has the potential to be helpful both for the community in Chicago and for police officers themselves. So one way to think about the motivation for what we've been working on is the accumulating body of knowledge that we have about the effects of trauma on human beings. We know that, for instance, exposure to violence has massive impacts on risk of all sorts of mental health problems, and including PTSD, but not limited to PTSD. If you look at the crime statistics by neighborhood for the city of Chicago, and you look at a high violence community like Englewood on the south side, you can do the math and figure out what the cumulative annual exposure is for Englewood residents, and you can understand the massive amounts of trauma, unfortunately, so much of it untreated trauma, that community residents have to deal with. But it's not just community residents that deal with violence exposure as well. If you think about the job of a police officer, their job is, when the call comes in for a shooting, to go out to the scene. And so if you think about the exposure of police officers serving a neighborhood like Englewood over the course of a single week, you can imagine the massive compounding effects of repeated violence exposure and the traumatizing and re-traumatizing effects of that. And so what are the consequences for all of us in the city of Chicago? Well, we can start with the police officers themselves. The report that led to the consent decree noted that the suicide rate among Chicago police officers is something like 60% higher than the national average. This is clearly from not doing an adequate job of addressing trauma exposure and related problems for police officers. It's clearly bad for Chicago police officers. It's also clearly bad for the citizens that Chicago police officers have to serve. So for me, one of the many, many heartbreaking features, but one of the key heartbreaking consequences of the Jason Van Dyke shooting of Laquan McDonald was to read news accounts after the fact of the paper trail of complaints that had been filed against Officer Van Dyke before the shooting, and to see the interview that his wife gave with the Tribune reporting that she could tell that he was changing as a person from his time on the job. And the heartbreaking thing in hindsight is that we didn't pay attention to those signals and do something and intervene to try and prevent that from happening in the first. Maybe we couldn't have prevented it, but it's not clear that we did everything that we could to have tried. Because most of what we do right now is reactive after the fact. The tragedy happens. We have disciplinary processes. We have support that goes to the community. But imagine we lived in a world in which we were purely reactive in every domain of life. You don't think about an umbrella until it's literally raining on you, right? You don't think about a snowplow until we have 12 inches of snow on the ground. We can see here in Chicago what we think of mayors who are purely reactive to things like snowstorms. We famously kicked one out of office. We don't do that in something as trivial as weather. We use data and information to see problems coming, right? We look at the weather report, we look at the forecast to see what's coming down the road and try and do something preventive in advance. And so at some big picture level, the work that we've been doing for the Chicago Police Department, the Illinois Attorney General's office, is to try and think about whether we can see problems coming down the road for police misconduct as well. Okay, and so what we did starting in 2017 is, in response to a request from the city, we gathered information from the Chicago Police Department's administrative data systems and built a statistical tool to see if we could predict police misconduct in the future from patterns of behavior and conduct for Chicago police officers in the past. And so what I want to do with the rest of my time is just tell you very quickly what that looks like. And so here's the basic intuition behind the statistical work that we did for the city. So essentially we take 5 years of past information on a police officer. This includes things like all of the complaints that have been filed against an officer and for what, whether they're sustained or not sustained. SPARs, so these are low-level administrative complaints against police. Their use of force reports, their arrest records, information on their activity on the job, and so on. You get them. And then what we do is we use that pattern of information for the officer of this 5-year period to see if we can identify patterns that are predictive of officers that are going to be at elevated risk for misconduct in the future. And we look separately at both on-duty misconduct and off-duty misconduct. And here's what we find when we do that. Let me just talk you through this graph. So we're looking backwards at 5 years of behavioral patterns for police officers. And then we're looking forward for 2 years to see if the officers that we think are at highest risk for misconduct actually are at highest risk. And so every officer's ranking in the risk distribution is on the x-axis in this graph. So the officers that we predict to be at highest risk are further to the right in the graph. And on the y-axis, we show the fraction of police officers who wind up having on-duty misconduct over the next 2-year period. And you can see, because the graph has a positive slope, you can see that the officers that we predict to be at elevated risk wind up having a higher misconduct rate in the future. So there is some predictive signal in the data about what's going to happen with that officer in the future. And you can see in particular at the very, very top of the predicted risk distribution, especially the top 1 or 2% of the predicted risk distribution have greatly elevated rates of risk. So the top 1% of the police officers in the department 12% of them experience misconduct over this 2-year period. On average, it's about 2% of all police officers over this. So it's a 6-fold increase relative to the average police officer. The good news is that the risk curve falls off very sharply. So there's a relatively small number of very high-risk officers, and then the curve flattens out very quickly. So most officers are at average or below average risk. There are so many of these lower risk officers, they wind up accounting for most of the misconduct that happens at the police department. So huge value in trying to prioritize support services to the highest risk, but that's not going to be a panacea because the high risk are truly at super highly elevated risk, but it's a relatively small subset. Okay, the final thing that I just want to tell you, and then I'll take whatever questions you have and let you move on to the agenda, is the last finding that I want to mention, which I think is important for the work that you all do, is it turns out in the data that we can see that the risk of on-duty misconduct winds up being very highly correlated with risk of off-duty misconduct, right? What that means is that police officers who are at risk for using force out of policy against a citizen, that's the same officer who's at elevated risk for getting a domestic violence arrest at home or a drunk driving arrest, or you can imagine, right? And vice versa. And the reason that I wanted to mention that is because the LAPD consent decree with the US Department of Justice provides a little bit of a kind of an aspirational ghost of Christmas future about what could potentially happen with the consent decree here in Chicago. So they made a big push in LA as part of their consent decree with DOJ to focus on officer wellness. You can see from this news headline, they went for a 2-year period without a single police officer suicide, which I think everyone in Chicago would be amazed at if we could accomplish that here. And it wasn't just good for police officers, it was good for the community as well. So this is a graph that shows you what happens to suspensions to police officers as the consent decree is happening. You can see there's a big fall off in the number of officers who were suspended for misconduct. You can see there's a big fall off in the number of police officers who were fired for misconduct. You might worry maybe that's just an artifact of LAPD gaming the administrative data or whatever. So the last thing that I'll just leave you with is this is a graph that shows the blue line here is the murder rate in Los Angeles per 100,000 over time, over the period that the consent decree was implemented. And the red line here is LA Times public opinion survey data about how the community feels about the police department. And you can see that the murder rate in LA is plummeting over this time period at exactly the same time that community support and confidence in LAPD is surging, right? And I think there are very few cities in the country that wouldn't look at this graph. I suspect Chicago is one of them and think, boy, if we could have that combination of outcomes here as well, we would greatly welcome that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Ludwig. Does anyone at the dais have any questions for the professor?
For that future the future misconduct, that 2 years where you're looking at predicted behavior, are you measuring misconduct by sustained administrative findings of misconduct?
So we can do it looking at sustained misconduct complaints. We can do it looking at unsustained misconduct complaints, and you see qualitatively similar patterns both ways.
But presumably if we're predicting misconduct, we would be looking at what's been determined to be misconduct, right?
The challenge for the challenge from a sort of a statistical data perspective is that, as you all know much better than I do, the investigatory process can take a long time with some of these cases. And so if you're predicting just sustained cases, you wind up losing a lot of that. You have to wait a long time for these cases to be sustained. I think the good news is that there's information in the data, whether you want to focus on sustained complaints or whether you want to look at any complaint for on-duty misconduct. Or if you look at, we're looking at any sort of on-duty complaint, you could also set a severity threshold and say, I only want to look at complaints for out of policy use of force, for instance. Again, you see that there's signs from the behavioral pattern in the last 5 years of what's coming down the road for the police officer in the future.
So is the best way to understand this that a certain behavioral pattern over 5 years historically predicts the accrual of complaints rather than that it predicts future misconduct?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Is the best way to understand this that what's being predicted is not necessarily misconduct, but rather complaints of misconduct?
No. So let's go back to your. Imagine that you look at the version of the results that has sustained complaints on the left-hand side, and imagine that you're looking at sustained complaints for out of policy use of force. Okay. What we're telling you is that we can look at the last 5 years of data on a police officer and figure out who the 1% of police officers are who are at greatly elevated risk for eventually, sometime over the next 2 years, having a sustained complaint for out of policy use of force. And one of the strongest predictors is not having something really serious in the past, but just the accrual of complaints in the past turns out to be a very strong predictor of something even really serious in the future. Does that make sense? So it's worth a lot to be able to see, like, this is a very bad trajectory, both for the community and for the police officer themselves, given the consequences that can result from this.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation and the research that went behind it. In LA, was there a kind of treatment or protocol that they used with the police officers who were at risk, or did they counsel them out of the department, or both?
I think because this is I think the first line of defense, or whatever you would want to call it, is supports for police officers. And I think LAPD was really ahead of the curve in thinking about how to support police officers. And so, they've got a protocol for supervisors for what to do. And then I think they were also trying to be very thoughtful in, mental health is a stigmatized problem in the United States in general. And there's certainly no reason to think it's less so among police officers, and lots of reasons to think that it might be even more so among police officers. And so they did what are, to me, pretty clever, far-sighted things like embedding mental health treatment providers in district station houses. So they would just have lots of informal interactions with police officers over time, which I think they believe increased the willingness of police officers to then get help, right? And the hope would be that the supports would then be useful, and you wouldn't need to take disciplinary action against a police officer because you wouldn't see a recurring pattern of misconduct in the future.
And just quickly, is there data about how many of those officers actually left the department and how that could account for the drop?
You can see that the number of terminations is going down over time, right? So it's not a incapacity. It's not a termination story.
Well, even if it weren't termination, somebody chooses to leave. I don't know how you're defining termination. Not in terms of.
Oh, sorry. I think the technical. I think the technical. Yeah, you can see here: terminated, resigned, or retired.
Okay,
yeah.
I can't see. But
yeah, no, sorry. I mistakenly verbally described it as terminated, but it's terminated, comma, resigned, comma, or retired. Yeah, I'm sorry, my fault. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Everyone hear me okay?
Okay.
Wonderful presentation. I appreciate the use of your predictive analytics. Now, I am curious about one thing. I know that obviously you're tasked with, understanding what's going on in CPD, but you did provide some comparative information with the LAPD. So I am curious if there has been, or if there will be, any sort of analysis done in terms of comparison between other major police departments that have a similar profile, i.e., population. I'm curious what in LA the calls per capita are per officer, perhaps what the arrest rate versus incarceration rate is. I think some of those things perhaps factor in too. We won't include weather, obviously. But these are just some things I'm curious if your team is looking into as well.
Yeah, we do a fair amount of cross-city comparisons, and maybe the one thing that I would say is it certainly seems true that places like LA and New York are almost like other planets compared to Chicago. It's easy to draw that inference. But if you rewind the clock to as recently as like 1991, the murder rate per capita in Chicago, LA, and New York was almost identical. Right? And so I'm old enough to remember 1991 like it was yesterday. So the cities have different weather patterns, they have different geographies, they have different population densities, they have different, governmental structures in terms of which level of government is responsible for what. But as recently as 1991, things from a very important sort of criminal justice perspective looked identical. And so I think, you might look at that and think maybe there's a little bit more commonality to these cities than you might initially believe. And if you can see things that are working that seem to be working in other cities, maybe that gives us some hope that some version of whatever they did could potentially be useful here.
Sure.
Would be the hypothesis. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Superintendent.
Jens, I have a quick question. So when you looked at this, because obviously you mentioned the mental health aspect of this, are we looking at where those officers were assigned, what part of the city they were assigned, what type of jobs they were handling? And along with that, when we're looking at complaints, whether they were sustained, not sustained, obviously you're looking at complaints and maybe just allegations at this point. It's a complaint against an officer. Are we looking at patterns where those patterns are similar? The complaints are kind of along the same lines? So let's say you see multiple use of force complaints or some other pattern of behavior. Are you looking at those things and taking them into consideration?
Yeah. So we're definitely accounting for where police officers are assigned, so what district they're working in and what their job classification is. So if you're on a TAC team versus patrol versus working at a desk, so we can account for that. I should thank you for the question. I should clarify that the statistical model that we're building is not the researchers at the University of Chicago forming a guess about what behavioral patterns in the data would be predictive, but it's rather using the latest statistical methods to let the data tell us what the patterns are that are most predictive, if that makes sense. And so it turns out that it's not so much what the previous complaints were for necessarily, but rather the number of complaints that an officer has had in the past turns out to be the thing that's most predictive of the sort of misconduct things that we want to prevent in the future. It didn't need to be that way, right? It easily could have turned out that, maybe it's a very reasonable hypothesis to think like it's really a pattern of the same sort of behavior being mentioned over and over, or escalating behavior. That's the worrisome sign. It turns out in the data that doesn't seem to be the case.
Thanks.
Oh, okay. You're in charge. Tell me.
No. Yeah, it's a great presentation, and happy to entertain questions from the public. Go ahead.
The misconduct that you're looking at, do you look at the suicide prevention? Are you tying that in with misconduct on one end and one on the other end? Are you looking at it and comparing that?
Yeah, sorry. So the question is are we comparing suicide prevention and misconduct? So statistically we're not looking at suicides in the data. They're way too common from sort of a public policy, public health, and human perspective. But statistically, we just can't predict which specific officers are going to experience suicide or suicide attempts. So what we're doing instead is we're looking at things like, an officer is getting arrested repeatedly for drunk driving, or driving while on drugs, or domestic violence, or whatever it is. And we're using that as kind of a proxy for officers who seem to be in some sort, like clearly some sort of like problem behavior, and maybe due partly to some sort of mental distress that we sort of collectively haven't identified and helped them with.
Thank you, Professor Ludwig,
Okay.
for this great presentation and for your interesting work.
Okay,
Really
thanks very
appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the drafts of the minutes of the board's public and closed meeting held on May 16?
So moved, Paula Wolf.
Sorry. Thank you, Ms. Cusack. All in favor, please raise your hands and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes. The next item is the report on minutes and recordings. Earlier today, the board, as required by the Illinois Open Meetings Act, met and considered minutes and recordings of all past closed meetings to determine whether the need for confidentiality exists. The board members unanimously agreed that it continues to be necessary to keep confidential the recordings of its past closed meetings and portions of the minutes. The board makes publicly available portions of its closed meeting minutes, and these minutes are included in the blue book that is posted on the board's website in advance of each public meeting. The Open Meetings Act permits the public bodies to dispose of these recordings of past closed meetings after 18 months. Is there a motion to approve the disposal of the recordings of past closed meetings that took place more than 18 months ago?
So moved, Paula Wolf.
All in favor, please raise your hands and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, the motion passes. The next regular public meeting of the police board will take place Thursday, July 18th at 7:30 p.m. right here at the police headquarters on 35th and Michigan Avenue. The police board meets in executive session to discuss various matters. Those discussions are closed to the public as authorized by Section 2C1, 4, 11, and 21 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act. Information on matters discussed in the executive sessions is included in the minutes of the meetings posted on our website. Is there a motion to close a series of future executive sessions as authorized by these sections of the Open Meetings Act?
So moved, Paula Wolf.
All in favor, please raise your hands and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing and hearing none, the motion passes. The next item on the agenda is to provide the public with an update on the arbitration. That's a different document for me. That's okay. I know where the update is, Max.
You're going off script.
Going off script. So as many of you know, that there is currently ongoing litigation between the FOP and the city of Chicago with respect to whether or not police officers accused of serious misconduct are allowed to have their cases heard before an arbitrator, or whether those cases need to be heard before the police board. At the end of June, the record on appeal is to be submitted, and at some point in mid-July, the FOP is supposed to file its opening brief. When the FOP files its opening brief, we will make the public aware of it and provide most likely a link to it on the board's website.
Well done.
The next item on the agenda is disciplinary cases. The police board hears cases when the superintendent files charges recommending that an officer be discharged from the Chicago Police Department for violating CPD's rules of conduct. The board, as authorized by the Open Meetings Act, has discussed in a closed meeting 2 police disciplinary cases that we will now be taking final action on. Regarding case number 23 PB 3027, the superintendent filed charges against police officer Tarden Hutchinson, recommending that he be discharged from the Chicago Police Department for conduct during off-duty domestic incidents. The superintendent subsequently moved to withdraw these charges because the parties agreed to settle the case and have the superintendent suspend Officer Hutchinson for 1 year. Is there a motion to reject the settlement agreement and deny the superintendent's motion?
So moved, Paula Wolf.
I will now call on the members of the board for their votes. Vice President, Ms. Paula Wolf.
Aye.
Ms. Badillo.
Aye.
Ms. Cusack.
Aye.
Ms. Dorley. Mr. Safakis. Mr. Terry. I also vote in favor of the motion. Voting in favor are board members Wolf, Badillo, Cusack, Dorley, Safakis, Terry, and myself. The motion passes by a vote of 7-0. Regarding case number 23PB3026, the superintendent filed charges against Sergeant Edward Layton, recommending that he be discharged from the Chicago Police Department for conduct unbecoming a police officer while on duty. The superintendent subsequently moved to withdraw these charges because the parties agreed to settle the case and have the superintendent suspend Officer Layton for 1 year. Or Sergeant Layton, for 1 year. Is there a motion to approve the settlement agreement and grant the superintendent's motion?
So moved, Paula Wolf.
I will now call on the members of the board for their votes. Ms. Paula Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Badillo?
Aye.
Ms. Cusack?
Aye.
Ms. Dorley? Mr. Safakis? Mr. Terry? I also vote in favor of the motion. Voting in favor are board members Wolf, Badillo, Cusack, Dorley, Safakis, Terry, and myself. The motion passes by a vote of 7-0. The written orders for these two cases will be entered as of today's date, issued to the parties, and then promptly posted on the board's website. The next item on the agenda is appeals by disqualified applicants to become Chicago police officers. When a person who applies to become a Chicago police officer is disqualified and removed from the eligibility list due to the results of a background examination, that person has a right to appeal to the police board. The board, as authorized by the Open Meetings Act, has discussed in a closed meeting several appeals. We will now take final action. Is there a motion to affirm the disqualification decisions for the following appeals? 24 AA 13 and 15, and reverse the disqualification decision for the following appeal, 24 AA 11.
So moved, Paula Wolf.
I will now call on the members of the board for their votes. Ms. Paula Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Badillo?
Aye.
Ms. Cusack?
Aye.
Ms. Dorley? Mr. Safakis? Mr. Terry? I also vote in favor of the motion. Voting in favor are board members Wolf, Badillo, Block, Cusack, Dorley, Safakis, Terry, and myself.
I think actually Block is not.
Oh, excuse me. Block is not here. The motion passes. The written decisions of these appeals will be entered as of today's date, sent to the parties, and promptly posted on the board's website. At last month's meeting, we announced and then posted on our website for public comment a draft policy that will require the police board to provide the Deputy Inspector General for Public Safety access to information and not interfere with the exercise of the deputy's discretionary or oversight responsibilities. The board, after posting these comments, received one public comment on the draft policy. It was from the consent decree monitor, who suggested minor revisions to the text and striking a footnote. We have revised the policy in response to this comment. Is there a motion to adopt the revised policy that has been posted on the board's website?
So moved, Paula Wolf.
All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing and hearing none, the motion passes. The next item on the agenda is policy on training. Paragraph number 542 of the consent decree on policing in Chicago requires the creation of a training policy for police board members and hearing officers. We will post a draft policy in the alerts section of the board's website, which is chicago.gov/policeboard, along with information on how to provide comments on the draft. Public comments are due by Monday, July 15th. At this time, I would now, one second. Before we get to the superintendent's comment, I'm just going to make two quick announcements about disagreement cases. We have on the agenda this evening announcements of 4 ruling on matters on which the Chief Administrator of the Civilian Office of Police Accountability and the Superintendent of Police did not agree regarding the discipline of a police officer. For each of these matters, a member of the police board was randomly selected to review and rule on the disagreement, and the board member's written opinion will be posted on the board's website. In request for review number 24-04, which I reviewed, the Chief Administrator recommended that Field Training Officer John Dockelson be suspended without pay for 90 days for use of excessive force. The Superintendent did not agree with this recommendation and proposed that the allocations be classified as exonerated. After considering this matter, it is my opinion that the Superintendent did not meet its burden in overcoming the Chief Administrator's recommendation for discipline. Request for review number 24-03, which Board Member Stephen Block reviewed, also involves Field Training Officer Dockelson. The Chief Administrator recommended that he be suspended without pay for 90 days for use of excessive force on a different occasion. The Superintendent also did not agree with this recommendation and proposed finding of not sustained for the excessive force allegation. Board Member Block ruled that the Superintendent did not meet the burden of overcoming the Chief Administrator's recommendation for discipline. Board Members Dorley and Safakis will make the next two announcements.
Good evening, everyone. In request for review number 24-02, the Chief Administrator recommended that Police Officer Roberto Gomez be discharged from the Chicago Police Department for using deadly force in violation of CPD policy. The interim superintendent disagreed, stating that the preponderance of the evidence did not support the finding that Officer Gomez used deadly force in violation of the CPD policy. After considering this matter, it is my opinion that the superintendent did not meet the burden of overcoming the Chief Administrator's recommendation for discipline. However, with this ruling, I am not saying that the Chief Administrator's recommendation is correct and that the superintendent's response is incorrect. Rather, I am saying that a hearing that provides due process to all parties is necessary to determine whether Officer Gomez violated any of the CPD's rules of conduct, and if so, the appropriate disciplinary action. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dorley?
Good evening. In request for review number 24-01, the Chief Administrator recommended that Police Officer Noah Ball be discharged from the Chicago Police Department for discharging his firearm in violation of CPD policy. The superintendent disagreed, stating that the preponderance of evidence did not support the finding that Officer Ball discharged his firearm in violation of CPD policy. After considering this matter, it is my opinion that the superintendent met the burden of proof of overcoming the Chief Administrator's recommendation for discipline. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dorley. At this time, I will now call on the Superintendent of Police, Mr. Larry Snelling, to give his report.
Good evening, everyone. And good evening, President Cooper, thank you. Thank you to all the board members, and congratulations to our newly appointed board members. So welcome aboard. I want to begin by asking everyone in the city to keep the family of 7-year-old Jaimani Amir Rivera in your thoughts. Jaimani's life was tragically taken in an act of senseless violence on Tuesday. This kind of violence, one that takes the life of an innocent child right in front of his parents, needs to come to an end. It's not acceptable, and no family should have to go through what Jaimani's family is going through right now. Earlier today, a 73-year-old retired Chicago police officer, Larry Newman, was killed in an act of gun violence. He spent his entire career safeguarding our city and spent his retirement as a reverend, speaking out against the violent crime that's plaguing our neighborhoods. Please keep his family in your thoughts. Shootings like these leave a lasting imprint of trauma in our communities. At CPD, we're working to prevent and address this violent type of crime, but we're also working to support all those who have been affected by it. Crime victim services are always available to any Chicagoan who needs additional support. This summer, we're broadening outreach. Each Wednesday this summer, our Crime Victim Service Unit will be providing resources at various Chicago public libraries throughout the city. This is CPD meeting our community members where they are and raising awareness around the resources available to them. As we do this, our officers will continue working in all of our neighborhoods to address this violent crime that's harming our communities. Our summer safety plan is rooted in being flexible and adjusting to what we're seeing in real time. Our detectives are continuing to investigate these crimes and hold these offenders accountable. We have to take violent offenders off the streets so that they can no longer continue to harm and destroy families. We're doing everything in our power to do this, but everyone has a responsibility, from our government partners to our elected officials and community partners. All of you here tonight can help us in this effort, even if it's just letting your fellow residents know about our tip line at cpdtip.com, cpdtip.com. We need people to come forward with information that can bring justice to the families who have been victimized by violent crime. I'd like to say that I always appreciate everyone who shows up to these meetings because it shows that you care about what's going on in your communities. It shows that you have a concern about what's happening in our streets right now. And when we look at the city of Chicago and the narrative that's wrapped around our city, we have to change that. We have to change the narrative of outside of our city where people make statements like they would love to come and see Chicago, but they don't want to be shot. That is the narrative that's wrapped around the city of Chicago. And I know seeing you here, how much you care about your city, because I love it just as much. This is where we all live. This is where we all want to continue to live, but we want to live here safely. There are too many great people in this city to allow this type of violence to continue without being confronted. So I will tell you this right now, I'm making an effort here, to reach out to all of those who want to reach back to make sure that we can stand together, work together to get to the bottom of this violent crime, hold violent offenders accountable, hold repeat offenders accountable, and protect our children and our elderly in this city. We can no longer continue to allow this type of behavior to destroy families. So when you see the type of trauma that this causes, I understand why everyone here understands that there needs to be a call to action. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Superintendent. I now like to call on the Chief Administrator of COPA, Andrea Kirsten, to give her report.
Good evening, and thank you also, President Cooper, for being able to be here before the board tonight, and congratulations and welcome to our two newest board members. I thought tonight's presentation from the University of Chicago Crime Lab was particularly interesting. Obviously talked a lot about the work of the Civilian Office of Police Accountability with respect to officer misconduct and the number of complaints that we receive every year. And the thought that we could start looking at some of the things that aren't in the four corners of any given misconduct investigation to try to understand better the dynamics that are going on, I think are concepts that are very familiar to our superintendent and the Chicago Police Department, and also the work that we're trying to do at COPA. I often report out on the numbers of complaints that we receive. Many of you are familiar with the fact that we get around 6,000 complaints or so a year against Chicago police officers. But I think it's really critically important to understand, first of all, not every complaint, to the point the superintendent was making earlier, not nearly every complaint becomes an allegation, and not nearly every allegation becomes a sustained allegation. However, I think, well, before I move on, I think it's important to understand only around 15% or so of COPA's concluded investigations actually involve sustained allegations of misconduct against Chicago Police Department members. It's a relatively small portion of the complaints that we receive. Some of them reflect some of the most significant misconduct. However, it's a really small percentage of the overall complaints that we receive. However, what I think we have not always done a great job of as a city, both this includes the oversight entities as well as the police department, is trying to understand what's going on in those complaints. Even the ones that don't get into this process, they never make it to a sustained allegation. There's no suspension that we're discussing. There's no possible termination. It's a complaint that doesn't have merit to it, but it still represents a breakdown in communication between the member of the community and the officers that were involved. And that is something that I think we could all learn a lot of lessons from, either if you're looking at it from a data perspective or really looking at it more qualitatively from the experiences that officers are having day in and day out when they have to respond to these calls, as well as community members who are day in and day out having to interact with the Chicago Police Department, sometimes in ways that aren't positive or productive. I really, really appreciated the overarching framework of this work that was presented to us being about trauma. I think there's one thing that we can all agree on at this table, and as many of us that are committed to trying to better increase our public safety, is that trauma plays a huge role in all of these incidents on all ends. And so, the police department is, I'm sure, deeply rooted in trying to address how trauma affects its officers. It's something that COPA pays attention to, even in the way that we conduct our interviews with officers, wanting to make sure that we use trauma-informed interview techniques, not just for complainants and community members, but also for the officers, because it's very clear that having to do this job has a lasting effect, and it builds up over time. So I'm excited to learn more about and appreciated Inspector General's questions about sort of the details behind what these statistics and what this predictive methodology may be able to point us in the direction of. But one thing that made me encouraged was the fact that the success that they were measuring in the Los Angeles Police Department was accompanied by successful compliance with their own consent decree. So as we continue to work as a city towards better, fuller, more meaningful compliance with our own consent decree, I'm hopeful and optimistic that we too will be able to see a lot of the improvement that this study was able to point out for LA. So that's all I wanted to speak on tonight, but thank you. And thank you for having that speaker tonight. It was very helpful.
Thank you, Chief Administrator. Max, do we have any public comments today? Oh, perfect. Thank you, Jasmine. So at this point, we will now turn to, we have a lot of public comments. We will turn to the public comments section of the agenda. And the first individual on the list who signed up to speak is Naina Fima. I apologize if I pronounced your name incorrectly. Okay. Kelly Moore is the next speaker on the list. Oh, my apologies. Take your time.
I'm going to try to get through this because I'm pretty cold. All right.
I think you're speaking for all of us when you say that.
Okay. All right. Good evening, board members and community members in attendance. My name is Naina Femi, and I'm a resident of the 7400 block of Calumet and also the Block Club president. We share the 3rd and 6th district boundaries on 75th Street, and I would like to thank both districts for their past public safety efforts. We are here today to improve public safety for our residents in the area. My concern is about 2 businesses on 75th Street, Solomon and Solomon Custom Shoe Repair at 340 East 75th Street at Calumet Avenue. They have an outdoor party every year in front of their business. I'm not certain if they have a sidewalk permit. However, there are usually tables on the public walkway, loud music past 11 p.m., and traffic on 75th Street is tied up all day. This party is disruptive to our blocks, and it's impossible for residents to rest or travel safely down 75th Street. We have addressed this problem with our local districts. However, we fear this activity will visit us again if not monitored by our police districts. My second business of concern is Margarita's Pizza at 346 East 75th Street at Calumet Avenue. They do not control the late night activities of their customers who blast their music while waiting for their orders. At various times, we see car washing and heavy loitering in their parking lot. We think maybe signage could possibly help that situation. Being a good business neighbor means being aware of the fact that their businesses are located within a residential community of mostly senior citizens and homeowners. We need to experience quiet enjoyment and quality of life, is that it for me? In their homes. We pay taxes for this consideration. Along with these businesses, the liquor establishments on 75th Street should be encouraged to monitor their clientele for loitering after hours and focus on being good business neighbors within our community. I want to thank you all for letting me speak.
Well, thank you for your comment. And I'm sure if you stick around after the meeting that a member of the law enforcement will be happy to speak with you about your concerns. The next person I would like to call is Miss Kelly Moore. Okay. Miss CC Edwards.
Okay, before I start, I want to make sure that you get these documents, okay? So I'm gonna start here, the superintendent, no, what this is, and then you can add it.
That sounds great, Miss Edwards.
I'll start there with the photos, and then. There's 2 pages.
There's 2 pages.
Yeah, that's what
So everybody takes. Thank you.
And these are pictures, and there's enough for everybody, so if you start here, then we'll just take one page like that.
Perfect. Of course.
Okay, so good evening, board members. My name is CC Edwards, and I'm a lifelong resident of Park Manor, Chatham, and Greater Grand Crossing. The Grand Crossing community worked over 14 months with BACP and our police districts 3rd and 6th to finalize 4 corrective action plan agreements for bars on 75th from State to Cottage Grove. We want to thank our police district commanders for assisting us to regain public safety in this area. We are also here today because our community requests continued support from you, Superintendent, to enforce public safety and issue violation citations as warranted in the area. We also want officers to get out of their vehicles and make certain that citizens are not retaliated against for making calls for public safety. We also request our 3rd and 6th district to increase their numbers, maybe with the new recruits, because response time to 911 calls is, again, an issue. Violators also include illegal tow trucks without license or tags. So they're back. Summer is here, as has been mentioned earlier. We also strongly support the closing of Happy Liquors located at 7901 South Cottage Grove. I did pass out the agreement so you could see how long those agreements go back to 2011. And we noticed that the BACP violations are severe and they warrant permanent closure. We stand behind Commander Tate on this issue. Please see the corrective action plans that you have now. They date back to 2011 and they did not comply with anything in there. Okay? Very little, very little. Finally, please take a look at the photos of our 3rd and 6th district officers. At this point, we have some photos, but I don't have those, but you have other photos that are showing you the activity that's going on in the cul-de-sacs and on the 75th Street near Langley and up to Cottage Grove and then down to all the way down to King Drive. So we do need consistent enforcement in that area. And finally, we want to say it's been great police work, working together with the community, and we do support our officers. We ask for, again, consistent enforcement between King Drive and Cottage Grove. The enforcement, we feel, will protect our public safety for our seniors, homeowners, and residents during this summer and during the DNC convention. We're very concerned about how we're going to remain protected.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Edwards.
you so much. Okay. And if you have any questions about the photographs, they're located on 75th and Langley. That's where those photos come from. And the agreement is Happy Liquors, BACP agreement. The attorneys in the room can understand that that's a firm agreement with the city, and it's grandfathered. So whoever buys the location has to remain with those conditions. They have to fulfill those. Okay?
Great. Thank you, Ms. Edwards. The next speaker I would like to call is Ms. Marilyn Howell.
Good evening, and thank you for letting me present my issue to the board. My name is Marlon Howell. I live in the 6th District, Beat 624, and I'm a member of the 7500 Eberhard Block Club. And I'm here today to ask, what are my rights as a homeowner in preventing the people that live across the street from me from burning down my home? For 3 years, I've asked them to not direct their aerial fireworks displays at my 2-flat building that has a flat roof. I call the police yearly. I email the Office Community Policing, my alderman. Last year, I emailed the mayor and the governor, but to no avail. This display of their fireworks, they stage in the middle of the street on Eberhard. And they align their fireworks directly towards my building, where when the sparks are emitted, they fall on my building. The placement of their fireworks are in the middle of the street, and they're basically projecting at my building, but I also have a 2-flat on the south side of me and two flats with flat roofs on the north side of me, which too are impacted. The people that do these fireworks yearly do not place any of the fireworks where any of the sparks are emitted on their property. So to me, this is an indication that they are going to protect theirs, but not concerned about others. With the help of family and friends, we have been able to get email communications going with Andrew McGill, which is the Chicago Fire Prevention Inspector, Commander William D. Epps from the Fire Prevention Bureau, and Chaddy Green, who have indicated to us that on the local level, they have no enforcement unless the fireworks used are a commercial grade and there's substantial proof that the fireworks they are using are commercial grade. We are very appreciative that they did take the time and concern to listen to our complaint and suggest that the height of the firework display needs to be viewed before they can have any type of enforcement. So this year, we are planning to basically take videos and provide those videos for the fire department and the Chicago police. I'm hopeful while we are gathering this information this year, this will be the 4th year, that I am hopeful they don't destroy my building. We plan to have that video and maybe provide it to the Chicago police and to the fire department so we can get some type of relief. Placing their fireworks, I think, on the city streets of Eberhard should merit some type of police attention. But in the years past, nothing has happened. I have exhausted every avenue, which constantly directs me back to the Chicago police. What can we do at this point? We are going again another year in hopes that their fun of displaying of fireworks do not destroy our homes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Howell, and we really appreciate your comments. If you could stick around after the meeting, I'm sure somebody would be happy to talk with you to help address this issue. The next person I would like to call is Marquetta Williams.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marquita Blake, and I'm just going to be before you briefly in regards to parking issues that we endure, especially during the warmer months on 76th and 75th and Langley. Many of you have viewed the photos and you see tons of cars. They're obstructing the sidewalks. They take over the alleys, all up and down the block. We come home, our children work nights or later shifts. They have to circle around for hours or legally park in our garage so that they can come home and come in the house. But today, I just want to bring light to what seems to be an increasingly overlooked issue of what might seem to be a small caveat to the amount of violence our community faces on a daily basis. The things that me and my neighbors endure night after night, especially Thursday through Sunday, is a brewing pot of destruction awaiting to happen. When things as simply as enforcing standard safety parking laws get swept underneath the rug. We contact the police night after night for no one to come to assist us. Residents of 76 and Langley have reported frequent issues, including, but not limited to, illegal parking in the alleys, obstructing walkways, vehicles parked illegally near fire hydrants, posing safety hazards. We have a lot of elders on the block and we have a cul-de-sac. So if the fire department or emergency EMS have to come down the block, all of the cars are impacted in the cul-de-sac and they can't gain access to that. Effective enforcement of permit parking and illegal sidewalk parking is essential for maintaining safety and accessibility in our cul-de-sac among 76th and 75th and Langley. By implementing a comprehensive enforcement plan that includes dedicated resources, technology, strict penalties, and community engagement and ongoing evaluations on ways we can work together with effective addressing the issues, we can significantly reduce parking violations and improve the quality of life for our residents and the safety, and in addition, not set up a perfect environment for something to break out or crime to happen. And those are my comments.
Thank you, Marquita. Again, if you could stay after the meeting, I'm sure somebody would be happy to speak with you. The next speaker I'd like to call is Mr. Matt Brandon.
I'd first like to welcome the two new members. Welcome to the board, and to Kristen and Inspector General, Mr. President, Vice President. Welcome back, Sue. Where you been? And to the board. I come here tonight, I was a little disappointed in the report that was given by the UFC. I thought that they missed some key predictive markers that could have helped that report. Specifically, when he started out and he talked about, and I was encouraged when he talked about the suicide rate comparative, and I thought that that's where that report would go, how we can help the police officers and address the suicide rate. So I've asked him for some information. I want to see his report, and I'll be better able to comment on it next time. But great question, Soup. I was thinking those same things that you were asking. I've got a little bit of a complaint here, and this goes to the issue of community and police working together. And half of this is my fault and half of this is the police officer's fault. So I take my share of the blame. I went to a restaurant in a district and I parked on the street, walked in, placed my order. Police officer pulled up in front of me on the wrong side of the street, walked in, placed her order, got her order, walked out, went in her car, sat down. I saw her get her ticket book out. She walked around to the back of my car, looked at my plate, started writing out a ticket. So I walked outside and I said, "Officer, are you writing me a ticket?" And she said, "Yeah, you're parked at a bus stop." I said, "No." I said, "A bus stop is clearly identified by two signs. One that says where the bus stop begins, one says where it ends." And she said, "Well, you're getting a ticket." I said, "Okay." She said, and you should be lucky because I was going to write you for no front plate." She was absolutely right. I got no complaint about that. So I told her, thank you very much. I took the ticket and I went to go back in. And she said, hey, she said, move your car. I said, well, I just want to go get my food like you got your food. And you already gave me the ticket, so why can't I just get my food? So she said, no, if you don't move your car, I'm going to write you another ticket. So I said, well, you go right ahead and write the ticket. Now, I talked to the lieutenant, and she said, did you tell him you're a former police officer? Did you tell him? No, I wanted to see how she treated the community. And what she did, she didn't even see the irony in her pulling up on the wrong side of the street on the bus stop to get out and go get her food, and then telling me, you're getting a ticket because I want to go get my food. So those are the little things that bring mistrust from the community to the police. And you know I support the police 100%. I've already talked to the commander. We're going to sit down, and I'm going to talk to the officer, and I'm just going to tell them my disappointment. But I'm going to pay for the front plate, but I'm going to contest the bus stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brannon. The next speaker I'd like to call is Ms. June Norfleet.
You know, every time you come to these police board meetings, my intention is always to say nothing. But you all always do something, throw something in the works that make me change my mind. The presentation by the University of Chicago is what prompted me to say something. I'm wondering, and it's just a question, and hopefully, is Professor Ludwig still here? He left. Okay.
He's not, but we'll be happy to give you his information.
Oh, okay. Very good. I'm wondering whether or not the information and the model that he's creating can be a predictive model that the police department might be able to use even in their hiring practice, or is this just basically post-exposure to police life where these various elements are then assessed and become predictors? And since I'm here and I've spent the whole day on 71st and Jeffrey, 71st and Merrill, 71st and whatever else is on 71st. As you know, it's a very challenging area. We've had quite a few shootings and several fatalities within the last, I don't even think it's been 2 weeks. Has it been 2 weeks? I'm not sure. And as you look at all of those massive multi-unit apartment units over there, and we all know the history of what has transformed that once gem of Chicago, that area that was once certainly a brilliant, resplendent part of our city, into something that is not recognizable really for human habitation almost and consumption. So my question is, can we get a substation maybe in that area? Because just having that area as a part of the 3rd and I'm not really sure, I gather it's the 4th district. I'm not sure, Superintendent Snelling, what the boundaries are over there, but they need additional help. And thank you very much. Again, welcome. You got your work cut out for you. Okay? All righty.
Thank you, Ms. Norfleet. The next speaker, and there's 5 more speakers left, is Mr. Michael Renzi.
That's Michael Lindsay.
Oh, Lindsay, sorry about that.
That's fine. That's fine. I stand before you, a park supervisor of Hamilton Park Cultural Center, which is located in Inglewood. And on May 25th, we had a Inglewood Safe Summer kickoff event that was roughly 400 in attendance. We had food, T-shirts, games. We had kids and teens out there. It was a great event to promote peace, love, and unity within the community. And Superintendent, I want to thank you for coming by. The kids, the youth, the teens, it was great to see you there. They was admired by your attire and also your presence. So thank you for coming out. I wanted to make sure I get that on the record. And also I want us not to forget that the people that are inside of those communities, the kids, the youth, the teens, the young adults, the adults are also victims themselves of the individuals who perpetrate those crimes upon those people inside of those communities. This evening, I was in the park. I was leaving to come here, and imagine it's nice and hot outside and warm. It was packed in the park. It was no violence, no fighting, no gangs, no anything that would bring shame on the community. But yet, it takes two people of not a car ride to come by and shoot up the whole park, and so then everyone look like they are criminals, and that's not the case. So I wanted to make sure that you guys remember the people also in those communities are also victims, and they also need our help, our prayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Is there a Pastor Doyle?
So, good evening, board and individuals in the audience. I want to add to what Mr. Lindsay said and provide context on what I just handed the superintendent. So, role modeling. The Black men who grew up with Superintendent Snelling is what I took away from that day, who couldn't believe that the Larry who they grew up with, because I was listening that day, is now leading the police department. So you have a great opportunity, and I'm wanting to direct my attention, my comments to both of you as attorneys. Everything that Mr. Lindsay just said, and we're now in the thick of the summer, that if you remember my comments from last police board meeting, they haven't changed. The problem is us, meaning African Americans, because the data shows we're the ones pulling the triggers. And also the solution is us. So it is my hope that we remember, again, the mothers of those who have been killed who were not doing anything, but being human. Today is the anniversary, and I need to say this. Today is the 3rd year anniversary of the youngest child of Charles and Luri, L-U-R-I, Eason. Their youngest son was killed 3 years ago today in the lower end of 79th Street for simply asking, do you play basketball? Google it, because again, the pain doesn't go away for mothers who send their children out to play and their children don't come home. So it is my sincerest hope that we start having authentic conversation about why that happens. Because at the end of the day, that is the deepest of pain when you don't know who to blame. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pastor Doyle. The next speaker is Mr. Terrence Link.
Good evening. I'm from the 37th Ward, the 15th District. I'm here asking for some assistance, some help. On May the 2nd, they opened up a drug spot on the corner of 5147 West Division. They moved from there to 1141 North Laramie, which is 4 doors from my house. They put a dining room table on the sidewalk. Kids can't go ride. My granddaughter's riding her bike. She can't get past. I go down there, ask the guys to move. We get into a confrontation. She asked me, Papa, let me just ride in the alley so they don't shoot you. As of today, I made 97 calls to 911 and to the 15th District. I spoke with a sergeant and a lieutenant. I've been asked to stop calling and tell my neighbors to call. I can't worry about my neighbors. I'm worried about me and my granddaughter. I need some help before it escalates to something that it shouldn't. Thank you.
Please stick around.
Yes, sir.
Please stick around.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Link. The next speaker is Mr. Bobby Kennedy.
You can start with Mr. I mailed this to you. It came back, USPS, no address. I think you're at number 2 of South Street.
209 South LaSalle.
Oh, is that what the lady told me on the phone? It was number 2.
Oh.
I didn't have you on there, so you don't have to do that. All right. People know why I've been here complaining before, but the Rainbow Car, which led me to Affinity Program, which I looked into and I've talked to people. And so I'm just going to read this and somebody tell me where I'm wrong afterwards. Okay? And I have nothing against the Affinity Program. I think it's pretty good. All right. Okay. Subject, Chicago Affinity Policing Program, CPD Special Order, S0203. The history I outlined for this program comes directly from talking to people. The Rainbow Car was used by Mayor Rahm Emanuel, was put into service in 2016 after a Pride Parade, okay? In 2020, the Affinity Program was started and made part of the community policing. The Rainbow Car was rolled into this program. That's what I'm assuming. Any group that has been disenfranchised, because whenever I talk to people, that's the buzzword I've been hearing, disenfranchised, by CPD was entitled to get an Affinity police car that could identify with their community. The cars have to be approved by CPD Affinity Program first. As of June 24, only one car is approved, the Rainbow Car, Pride Car. A Chinese car was in the works to be approved, but never made it out of review, but was also never rejected. Where can I get answers on this car that was not approved? There are 2 Rainbow Cars which are currently assigned to CPT headquarters and work all over the city. The original parade car is assigned to the 19th district. Now we have another one on the street, not sure where it's assigned to. Based on any group that had been disenfranchised by CPD was entitled to get an Affinity police car, should you add the Chinese, the Black and Hispanic communities, and of course already the Pride Car groups disenfranchised by CPD, you would have a minimum of 5 CPD cars, okay? My sources tell me they are real police cars and can pull a car over, give a ticket, and any other normal police engagement. My suggestions, because everybody knows I hate seeing that Rainbow Car with the CPD on a shield on the side. 2 suggestions. There should only be one Affinity police car designed for the CPD that would look very similar to the regular white car with blue decals. Affinity cars would be blue with white decals. To the normal citizen, it's a police car. CPD would know the difference between the 2. All right. Number 2, the defund the police crowd wants separate programs run by civilians. That sounds very much like the Affinity Program, except people working in the program are police officers. I say roll it into a civilian program run by CPD, out of CPD headquarters, keeping the same people in place should they wish to stay on as peace officers or whatever would work to allow concealed carry for self-protection. They would be able to keep their pensions in place as city employees. So that's another recommendation. Last, if y'all keep it this way, keep the same program, allowing all communities that were disenfranchised by CPD and allow all communities that are entitled to get an Affinity police car that will identify their community. This will add lots of confusion as to who are the police. And I was asking also if the aldermen are aware of this program. And the people I talk to still think that the Rainbow Car is not a police car. And other people say, I wouldn't pull over for that damn car. So I'm just saying, if you're going to put all these cars out there, it's just going to create confusion. Can you help me on anything here I might have been wrong on?
We can talk afterwards, but thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Okay, the Chinese police car, was it still in the Affinity Program?
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. But we can talk afterwards.
Okay.
The last speaker on the list is Mr. Robert Moore, who I'm told is not here. So it appears that all members of the public who have signed up to speak have been called. Is there a motion to adjourn today's meeting? All in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes and the meeting is adjourned.